Welcome back to the Adelphi Sessions, where I talk with people that have been involved with the Adelphi brand throughout the times. I've spoken to our distributors in Canada, New Zealand. I've spoken to Charlie Maclean, and I'm very excited today because I'm going to speak to Jamie Walker, who created Adelphi and whose history is with the brand. So welcome, Jamie. It's lovely to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. I have, we were chatting a little bit there earlier. I have never met you or even seen you before, so this is a first for me. And I've heard so much about you. I'm delighted.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I'm just delighted that Adelphi is still just expanding, ever expanding, and just doing so well. I mean, it's very exciting for me, and I hear little snippets as well. And so it's great to be sort of asked to come and join in again. So,
I know.
fantastic. Thank you.
We appreciate it so much. It's nice to be able to ask you those questions that I have lined up, because
right.
As a team we talk about things all the time, and we're like, oh, we're sure it was Jamie Walker that did that, and so now I have a chance to ask you these questions. It's lovely. So you're in Edinburgh right now.
I'm in Edinburgh. Yeah. In fact, very, very close to. I've ended up on India Street, but the original office was on Gloucester Lane, so which is sort of the next sort of thing. So I can almost wave from my window where the Adelphi office was at the very start.
And when I was chatting to Charlie, he mentioned the office because he lives really close by.
Well, he's rather bizarrely, he's at the bottom of Gloucester Lane, also known as Stinky Lane, but not because of Adelphi whiskey, obviously. But he is at the bottom of the lane, and I'm sort of parallel to it. So there's a very strong pull of it. The Adelphi force is strong, I think. It's the only way to put it.
It's in the air. So do you ever bump into each other when you're going out for your eggs and breads in the morning, or does that?
We haven't really bumped into each other. I've been round to his cave, you could say. We've had a couple of good chats, but he's kept so busy by Adelphi that actually I don't think I've seen one of his great old friends around and about, and every time I say, "Where's Charlie?" he says, "Oh, he's in Cambodia, or he's in Canada, or he's all over the world." A bit like Alex as well, actually. He's very well traveled, Charlie.
Very much so, yeah. He's loved all over the world. It's funny, he's famous and very famous.
Well, I got the shock of my life. I was out in South Africa for quite a few years and was completely detached from whiskey and from Adelphi and everything else, and hadn't been home for about 3 years or so, and then came through duty free, and I kept on bumping into life-size Charlies in the duty-free zone, and it was quite a shock, but a nice shock. I mean, it's like it was the most bizarre way to sort of be so detached for 3 years and then come back, and the first face I see is a lot of cutouts of Charlie.
Please tell me you took one home with you.
No, I couldn't fit it under my arm. It's a big man.
You couldn't really draw a monocle and a moustache on him because he's already got that.
Oh, yeah, he's already there. It was all good. It was all good.
How did you and Charlie get to meet each other?
Well, that was through our mutual friend. Well, David Coates. He was the owner of McElroy Coates and was a designer for Adelphi, and he and I were having a meeting, and he just said, I think you should meet my friend Charlie. And we met, and we went. He drove me out to Charlie's house at about, I don't know, mid-afternoon, and I think by about 4 a.m, Charlie and I were fairly firm friends. We decided that we liked all the same whiskies, and all was good in the world. So that was really how we met. It was a very, I asked Charlie if he'd like to get involved there and then, because I just thought he was, he just had the same, well, even more so, enthusiasm for whiskey that I had, and his knowledge was great, and we just got on.
So by then, You had already started Adelphi, is that right? So you had Adelphi?
Well, I hadn't actually started. I can't remember. I don't know if I actually had any actual whiskey, but I'd started setting things up. So I had the office. I'd done a design competition, or I'd put out to tender the design. I had the basics set up, and all I needed was Charlie, really, to start tasting with.
So you had the design, you had the office, and then fate put you together with Charlie.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just David Coates.
Yeah.
He thought that we would probably get on, and he was right.
He was right.
Yeah, we had. It was the beginning of many good tasting sessions, and great attention to detail on every single bottling that we ever did.
Great.
It was very thoroughly examined by Charlie and myself. And we'd always have at least one or two guests as well, guest tasters. So that was it was a very important part of Adelphi.
Yes, and it still is.
That's good. That's very good to hear. Yes.
What was the first whiskey then that you brought in as the kickoff whiskey?
This would be quite close to your heart. It was Springbank. Had 4 casks of 28-year-old sherry Springbank, and 1965, and it was just absolutely. It was so good. I couldn't believe how good it was. I had to buy all 4 casks that were offered to me, which, I suppose it didn't make any sense to have 4 of the same whiskies on a single cask bottling company. But the problem with Adelphi is it could never pass up a good cask. And these were exceptional, and it was the first one, so I suppose I've never really thought about it.
Yeah,
I just bought what was best, and that was it. And Springbank was, I'd spent a lot of pretty well all my childhood summers down at Macrahanish, where there's a family cottage, and so I knew the area well, and I knew, I mean, Springbank. Sort of from tasting the sort of the normal distillery bottlings, if you like, but I hadn't truly appreciated Springbank until I had an Adelphi Springbank, and it was, I had a good relationship with them. We even got a photograph of my first child. We were going around, she was in a papoose. We were going around Springbank. I can't remember if she was smiling that all the time, but I think she was smiling most of the time. She enjoyed her tour.
So when was this then? This is in the early 90s or mid 90s?
Yeah, that was 1992, 93. That sort of, it was just at the beginning. So it was, as I said, it was the first bottling I came across.
4 casks of Springbank from 1965. I mean, I've heard so many stories about Springbank from the 60s, mid 60s to the late 60s, and I've tried one from I think 68 or 69, and they were just different. It was so different and so good.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely wonderful. I mean, Springbank, I was very lucky to be able to find good casks of Springbank throughout. My tenure at Adelphi, if you like, and I'm hopefully you'll be helping procure more of the same, more of the top quality Springbank.
It's funny, Alex and Connell, who deal with the cask buying predominantly in the team, have their contacts, and they don't necessarily share them always with the whole team. So it's quite good. They'll just say, we've got some stock coming in, and you really don't ask that much more. But it's a team effort. We do all try and bring casks to the table, but they do have some really good long-term contacts that are obviously maybe some that you've started them off with. I don't know, but
clearly I wouldn't be allowed to say anything about that.
Maybe after.
Well, I can't do it on. I see record, and I can't do it now.
No, I shall not waterboard you to do that. But I like
easy.
the mystery and the part of the charm as well. I have full trust in Alex. Like yourself, picks the best whiskies and don't bottle it because he has to. If it's not good enough, then it won't bottle. And if it's good enough, I'm not going to say no. And that's why, in fact, the bottle I have next to me here, it's 5, right? So people will be a bit fuzzy about a 5-year-old, maybe. A 5-year-old Ben Nevis, which it was described last week as liquid gravy. Or well, dinner gravy. But,
the worst things than liquid gravy. My goodness, that sounds delicious to me.
It is great. And it's 5. So it's a great quality whiskey. And Alex and Connell decided this is it. We're bottling it.
Well, funny enough, I bottled up a 5-year-old Springbank.
Oh.
And I think the second last bottle I sold to the Wadi Doug when I came back from South Africa. So it was in the Wadi Doug about 2 years ago. The owner of the Wadi Doug, basically, he put it on the shelf. Too many people asked for it, and they took it down and refused to sell it to anyone. He just drank it himself. And that's the sort of bottling that it's just a joy that Adelphi is continuing that sort of route.
They're good to share.
Where it's almost too good to share, but you have to share it. That's the whole point of it. But I've never met someone who has got too much, has sort of kept an open bottle of Adelphi. It's always been drunk.
Yeah, but that's what it's for. We all
exactly.
open the bottle.
So no, it's been good.
I noticed we were talking there a little bit earlier, but please do tell me the design. We haven't changed any of the label design since.
The only thing you've changed is Adelphi. I think it's Selection now. I can't actually see that because I'm on my phone.
Yeah, Selection.
It was Adelphi Distillery, and I can't remember. I think it was because it wasn't actually a physical distillery, but my great grandfather owned the Adelphi Distillery in the Gorbals. And he was rather an amazing man. He played rugger for Scotland. He got a double first in chemistry from Oxford. He was in the Oxford 8. And he went off, with his sort of chemistry degree, he went off and effectively discovered distiller's yeast, or brewer's yeast, I should say, because the Germans weren't very keen to share. So he actually went and bought from a minor brewer and brought it back to Scotland. But when he was going round, he sort of said, looking at his notes, said, but hang on, that says that, and you're saying this in your thing. He said, do you think I would have the right thing on the dial? Because otherwise people would copy what we do to make it. So he managed to extract it, if you like, and bring it back to Scotland. And that was one of his things. I don't know the full story. Annoyingly, family bits of paper and things have disappeared. But he also had a distillery in Ireland, Limerick Distillery, which I've went to visit the site of. The manager's house, beautiful Georgian house, is still there. And there was a pub quite close to where the distillery was, with A. Walker and Company, one of those wonderful glass mirrors. But the problem is that the publican, the moment he clocked who I was, his price rocketed. probably more than the pub was worth. So I had to say no to that, annoyingly. It's probably still there, actually, but maybe I should go and have another shot. And he also had a distillery in Vauxhall in Liverpool. So he had a sort of distillery in the home nations, if you like, apart from Wales. But now the Welsh have got their own distilleries.
I was sent photocopies from a book by an Irish contact. He sent me the details on the Limerick distillery, and when he heard, when I was chatting to him, he heard I was interested. So I've got to read them all through again. But it does talk very highly about your great grandfather.
Yeah.
There's a new distillery being built, I think, over there. But
is there? That's fascinating.
Not on the actual grounds. I think it's nearby. No.
Yeah. Well, I imagine the water's pretty good there, to be honest.
Yeah.
A little bit like in the West, a lot of it falls. So
it was your great grandfather. No, 5 generations. Is that right? No, 3 generations.
It was basically great grandfather who was the great whiskey baron,
Yeah.
And he joined up with other. I mean, Baron is, you know, they weren't actual barons, but they were whiskey barons, if you like, or whiskey magnates, and they joined together to form what is now Diageo in 1906, or 1902 or 3 maybe, around that sort of time, the beginning of the century. They sort of joined to what became distillers. And he remained a director until I think 1920, which is roughly when he died. I think 1923 or something. So that it was, you know, he really was a proper whiskey baron and a sort of creator of the modern whiskey industry.
And the distillery in Glasgow had a bit of a rough ending.
I think it blew up. I think it blew up or something. It certainly flooded. I remember someone coming. I've got a bottle from the original Gorbals thing, not full. So I don't know what the Adelphi whiskey actually tasted like. Annoyingly, and I did take the cork out and tried to smell it, but obviously it was fusty. But it was
history you have there. That's great.
It's lovely to have. I mean, I don't think you know. It's just, and actually, the sort of typeface is not that far away from. Maybe I should show you. Maybe I should show you the bottle. I'll get the bottle. Yes, I've got it. Hang on one sec. Yes. So here it is. It's rather a cute little.
Adelphi grain whiskey. That's absolutely beautiful.
So it's amazing, isn't it? It's a lovely sort of shape of bottle as well.
The shape and the color of the glass. I really love that.
I mean, I have to say, I did definitely think about doing these, and I'm not quite sure what. It must be 35 centiliter. So it's like a half bottle, but it's rather an elegant half bottle, and it almost looks like it's hand blown, but it's not. But I think it's rather an elegant shape, and that you can just see the
distillery co. Loch Cashman Distillery. I remember
Loch Cashman Distillery, the distillery's co. Yeah, so that would have been in December 1915 or something or other. Yeah, I can't quite read it. What else it says? It doesn't really say very much else. But anyway, that's quite fun. That's quite a fun thing to have.
Yeah, because the bottles back in those days, I envisaged them small and dumpy and usually black, like really quite dark.
Yes. Well, I suspect that some of them would have been. I mean, that's the dumpy bottle. But for a grain whiskey, that seems a lot of thought's gone into that bottle. So that's rather nice. Maybe great grandfather was ahead of the curve. I mean, he must have been actually.
Sounds like it. And then, I mean, whiskey did not carry on exactly after in your family line, or did you just decide this is it? I'm going to go in his footstep and start my own.
Well, I mean, I'd always enjoyed whiskey. I mean, my grandfather was a QC, and my father was he sort of was a banker, and so the family did not. There was no whiskey involvement at all, and I was sort of gently on a path to chartered accountancy, which didn't totally suit where I was wanting to go, and I found myself not in Glasgow with Ernst & Young, but up in Knockdhu Distillery with Stuart Robertson, who was the extremely entertaining and wonderful man who was the manager up there, and he was probably the man that gave me the spark to create Adelphi. I would imagine, because I went up there. As I said, I enjoyed whiskey, and I drank quite a lot of whiskey, but my knowledge was fairly poor. Okay. I think I was probably a Lagavulin light would be about my sort of. That was where I was. I loved Lagavulin. I thought it was absolutely the bee's knees. It really was a brilliant dram, and still is. I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of my favourite whiskey visits was just going to the south of Islay and seeing Lafroig, Lagavulin, and Ardbeg just in a row. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful distilleries, and makes me sort of shiver to think about it. It's almost like, you know, it's a holy sight almost. It really is.
It absolutely is. And now they've tarmacked the little route so you can walk along the distillery.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Before it was quite dangerous with the road, so now you can walk safely. And Lagavulin has built a little pontoon now. It's stunning. It's just.
Yeah,
it is one of these holy places if you're into your smoky whiskies. That's for
it
sure.
is absolutely. No, well, Ardbeg, I mean, that's a whole different story. Unfortunately, I had a very good into Ardbeg. It was absolutely one of my favourite whiskies, and
So did it mean
sorry.
because those whiskies were your favoured them? Did it mean you bottled more of the smoky peaty whiskies? Did you have a good supply of those whiskies in the 90s?
Well, I think, I mean, I nurtured a good supply with some of the whiskies, and some of the nurturing was better than others, like you could say. But you can't really have a favourite whiskey at that level, because every distillery has total jams. I mean, totally amazing whiskies, and that's where, you know, going back to Stuart Robson, that's what he taught me, because I was working in Knockdew Distillery, which is the most spectacular sighting near Keith and Huntley. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot, and a really lovely wee distillery. And you know, he introduced me to the whole concept of the manager's dram. And at the end of the week, he'd give me a dram, but we'd actually just go and draw it from a cask. So we got the dog, drew a wee bit, and tasted that, and it was part of what he was doing anyway. So he had these sort of samples, and it was to make sure that the right cask mix went for the blending. But the great thing is, some of those casks were just unbelievably good, and it suddenly just opened my, you know, the scales fell away. It was my Damascus moment. I just realized that the whiskey I'd been drinking was whiskey, and I hadn't even touched whiskey. I hadn't touched Adelphi. I hadn't touched the real single cask whiskies.
And was single casks a big thing in the 90s? Was it something?
The Scotch Malt Whisky Society was, I think, it was really just them that were doing anything at the time. So 1990, 1991. The Scotch, I don't know when the Scotch Malt Whisky Society started. I think it was earlier, but they were very much. They had beautiful tasting rooms, and in fact, funny enough, it was in Leith. And so while I was having meetings with McElroy Coates about designs and stuff, we would go and have a dram in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. So that it was really just, I suppose, it re-emphasized to me the wonderful scope for whiskey.
Yeah.
But I suppose I took a slightly different approach than the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. They were a club, and the emphasis was on a sort of cozy, you know, fire, and just a lovely atmosphere to drink your club whiskey, if you like. Whereas I suppose with Adelphi, what I wanted to do was open it up, and make it more mainstream, really. That was the idea.
And you know what? It's just different. Single cask whiskey. I've talked about this concept with in all my Adelphi sessions, but I can only imagine, because even now it takes explaining. I'm sorry, there's only 260 bottles because it's one cask. You can't have more. I'm sorry, and it's can't drink because it's straight from the cask. So you're explaining all these things, and even these days where people are quite skilled on whiskey, how was it in the 90s? Did they get the concept that was, it's a good whiskey, but I can't buy it again. See it and buy it type of thing.
Oh no, there were a few slightly bemused phone calls that I had to field. You could see a certain amount of disappointment that had to be managed. But the great thing is, and I think you've touched on this as well with Alex, almost from the get-go, my biggest problem with Adelphi was finding enough whiskey, finding enough casks. And it's a really lovely problem to have, but because after the first sort of, I don't suppose, I suppose it took me about 3 or 4 years to get the brand known and get enough exporters or importers, involved, and the sort of the critical mass was reached. But then it was just the hardest thing was finding the casks. It really was. Yeah, I mean, I suppose a little bit like Alex by the sounds of it. I didn't spend an awful lot of time in my office, because it was, you had to go out and meet people and track these beautiful whiskies down where possible.
Quite a few lunches, was there?
Charlie's been talking, has he? I don't know what you mean.
Long lunches. You mentioned long lunches.
I think the 90s were all about lunches.
I think you're right. No matter what industry you were in, if you were making a deal, long lunches were the thing to do.
Yeah, lunches were great because we'd have a tasting session in the morning, because that was when the palate is at its cleanest. And we knew this because of wonderful Sheila Birtles, who was, if you like, she was the whiskey tasting guru. She had a little course at Heriot-Watt University as part of their brewing and distilling. And she's an amazing lady, lovely woman, and helped us, helped both of us actually. But I remember going on her whiskey course, and the first thing was what was it, seven. We had 7 different glasses in front of us, but they were all the most extraordinary colors, from green, purple, yellow. I mean, just sort of everything. And she said, all of these, alcoholic drinks, but I bet you don't get them. And none of us did. Even though the purple one was gin. Yeah. We're also saying it must be an Armagnac or something like that. And it taught, that was the first sort of thing that taught me about the color of casks, coloring your thought as to where the whiskey's from, or what whiskey it is. So it was to try and take away any prejudice. So it's all about the nose and the taste and how it actually was. So I suppose where I'm going with this is it meant that Charlie and I had to have a much more rigorous tasting sort of regime than most whiskey companies would have, because it was a single cask, because it was highly specialized. We needed to go through all the motions. So of course a good lunch afterwards would help with the stomach. You'd have a reasonably, we'd need some food. Yeah. So the only answer was a good lunch.
Well, I think we've been there. That sounds a sensible option.
It absolutely was. We may have had a dram after lunch too, but who knows?
Who were your customers? Who did you deal with, or who were you selling to?
Well, that was quite interesting, because when I started, I thought, right, well, this is going to be to private individuals, mostly within Britain, and I'm hoping some friends will buy some as well. So year one, having thought that I'd be 95%, domestic, or 99% domestic, with a few friends, and maybe sort of send the odd thing overseas. I found that it was the other way around: 95% overseas, 5% UK, and not a friend in sight.
We wanting free.
I think I might have given away too many bottles.
Too generous. That's interesting. So this, well, I suppose little office that you had in Edinburgh, what was your marketing then? How did they find out about you overseas?
Well, I went to whiskey trade shows, and also I went on a little trek. I went to Vinexpo, which was the thing in Bordeaux, a few times.
That's still going.
That was quite hair-raising stuff. But I had my wine merchant, Ian Cumming, helped me a lot. He had Wiggums of Air, and we actually went on a little European road trip, and we went round a few things, and it was great. I mean, I'd never been to Lyon before, and that's the sort of the mecca of food. And you know, he took me to see some of his, you know, some of the people he bought from. He was introducing me, so they maybe buy from me, and it was. I suppose it was just trumping the streets, so to speak. It was the only way of getting the name out there and just getting started.
Handing out your card, and then the sales happened.
Yeah, and also, you know, friends, even if they didn't buy whiskey off me, they might sort of say, a friend of mine has an import company here, why don't you get in touch? And then I suppose word started to get out, and then after a few years, we would be contacted.
Yeah.
And actually that would slightly come back to the Springbank. I always remember there's a Taiwanese being mad that we didn't have any more of that 28-year-old Springbank. And I was saying, well, you know, we did bottle it 4 or 5 years ago. So,
yeah.
But we sold them a cask of 30-year-old instead, which was heavily sherried. And it was really just beautiful. It came out, we brought it out at the same time as the Black Beaumont, and it was hilarious, sort of, you know, all these fantastic dark whiskies suddenly coming onto the market.
I just want to create a time capsule now and go back to your office back then.
Yeah, no, I sometimes do as well.
I know. And what was the strategy like? Because now we're trying to do 4 releases a year, maybe, and 10 or between 10 and 15 in each. It depends on what we have to choose from. Did you have that, or did you just get good casks, let's bottle them, or how did you work it out?
Well, I think I suppose I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to buy a good cask, so that was the primary thing. And I mean, strategy, that's a sort of, I mean, we were selling things pretty much as they came in.
Really? So you got a good job, you phoned a couple of people, and it was gone.
And it was gone. And it was certainly towards the time when Keith and Donald took over, you know, that was very much the state. I mean, you know, it'd almost be a pre-sell.
Yeah.
So the strategy from going out and doing tastings became more of a pre-sell, because people trusted, you know, my nose, Charlie's nose, Sheila's nose, just the Adelphi nose. In fact, Charlie was known as the Adelphi nose, really, and I think still is, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
I hope so. Yes, good.
Very much so.
Excellent.
Charlie the nose. Yeah, he
yes.
We get samples in, and we very much appreciate his comments on the whiskies. And we recently bottled. So the first single. Sorry, the first independent bottling from Ardnamurchan was, surprise, surprise, Adelphi, and it was bottled in his name. It had his name on. He'd chosen the whiskey. He tried it. He wrote the tasting notes, and then it was his moustache and a little monocle in the circle. And it was for Maclean and Bruce, Maclean and Bruce bottling. So
excellent. Oh, well, that's brilliant.
Yeah, first time.
Well, it's very exciting that Ardnamurchan Distillery. I mean, that just, you know, that was my, you know, dream, was to have a distillery, and it's just so wonderful that you know, you know, Alex and Donald and Keith sort of have just taken it on, and you know, what was my baby sort of became a teenager, and is now properly grown up and mature.
So thank you for starting that. I didn't know that was always in your mind as well, so that's great to hear that it's
well, I tried to buy Ardbeg Distillery, but came second in that.
Did you?
So I nearly but the consortium I was with actually ended up buying Bruichladdich, but I was very keen to get Ardbeg, but sadly we came second.
Oh wow.
that was sort of, you know, that I sort of nearly that was a sort of nearly moment.
It wasn't meant to be.
It wasn't. I don't think it was that near in terms of the cash, but.
So,
but up here it felt close.
The team that picked casks were yourself and Charlie, and did you always agree?
No.
Did you not? No. I love that.
No, we didn't always agree, and that's the other thing, you know, because I mean, we agreed to disagree, but we didn't always agree, and well, as you yourself know, every cask is unique.
Yeah.
It's not different; it's unique. So, and everyone has their own way of tasting. Their own palate has been developed through what they've had in the past, and how, you know, and how you sort of. And I think Charlie and I always disagreed slightly on pineapple and smelly cheese, which are sort of pretty well the same on the whiskey wheel. But I couldn't really, if something got that pineapple-y, that was it for me. I couldn't do it. So I love smelly cheese, but pineapple just, And I think, so that would be one thing where we might not have worked exactly. And I think, you know, Adelphi addicts will have benefited from that, because we were very rigorous about our tasting. I mean, we just were very rigorous.
Who would have won that argument if something had a pineapple in it?
I think we'd have had lunch and talked about it.
Yeah, okay. So when I did his Adelphi chat or Adelphi session with Charlie, and he speaks very warmly about this.
Yes.
Which, is affectionately known as Granny's Blend. And
yes,
it was because your granny wanted a nice dram. Is that how it was?
That's how it was. Well, Granny Walker was very supportive when I set up Adelphi. She was quite hilarious and quite enjoyed it. And you know, both of my grannies, but particularly Granny Walker, drank whiskey.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, well, why don't I you know, see if they like some of my Adelphis. And I gave them a bottle of not Ardbeg. I think probably it was Knock Dew. Would have been one of the early ones, so Knock Dew or Bladnoch. And I noticed that opened but fairly untouched was the result from both of them. And then Granny Walker sort of said, "Yeah, I don't really like malt whiskey. I like blended whiskey." So I thought, right, great. So we got another tasting panel together, including my grannies.
Were both grannies involved?
Both grannies were involved, absolutely. They got sent samples, or I certainly took samples to, I think, Granny Walker, and you know, asked which one they liked, and the one that you are holding there, that is Granny's Blend. So Granny, we did do other sort of slightly jokey blends. You know, Breath of Angels was one, which then someone came up and said, you can't do that, so we made it Breath of Adelphi. But it was every Christmas we'd do something slightly different.
Yeah.
And that's where the nightcaps came in as well. We sort of started doing the nightcaps.
Yeah.
And you know, those went down particularly well. I have to say, putting the wax topping on them was not much fun in a very small office, because health and safety would not approve right now at all. The fumes were quite spectacularly unpleasant, but the bottles were very dinky, perfect for a game of golf. You know, quite a lot of business was done on the golf course and other places as well. So always handy to have a few Adelphi nightcaps on you. And I used to, my suitcase, whenever I was, or my briefcase, which you certainly couldn't do now with flying and all that sort of stuff, used to be absolutely stuffed full of Adelphi nightcaps. And on longer haul flights, I would probably get a few Adelphi addicts confirmed on the plane, because we would just have a couple en route to New York or wherever, and it would just be quite hilarious.
The Breath of series we've continued. We've got the Breath of the Isles, and we've got Breath of, so we use that now as well. And
yes, that's good. That's good. What you don't use is sheet whiskey, spelt SHYTE.
Well, you just pronounced it in a Swedish way, because we said
yes, exactly. That was because it was a friend who married a Swede, funnily enough, who brought out sheet shirts, and we did a couple of things. That was just to take the mickey out of pink shirts.
I had no idea about this.
So we did sheet whiskey, and it was rather a fine thing. Sadly, I haven't got the label. I'm not even sure where you'd find it. It probably isn't on the internet.
Exactly where you find it, because one shop in Edinburgh decided this is a great thing to have on our shelves, and the Royal Mile whiskies are still selling it. It's one of their best whiskies.
Do they still sell it? Okay, hilarious.
We have to make it for them because they just think it's great. And it's funny how it came about with the story about the shirts. It
was just literally I wanted he was making these shirts, and I bought some shirts off him, and I paid him in whiskey. I mean, that was the great thing. Whiskey is a currency, basically. So then we thought, well, why not just do sheet whiskey as well? I mean, why not?
Absolutely. And it's been
that was quite a lot of decisions were just made on the hoof like that, and they just sort of fitted in. And if they worked, they worked. If they didn't, we could try something different. Always sticking to the core, but it was quite fun just to have other little things to add on to.
Have you managed to visit Ardnamurchan actually? Have you been out to see the distillery?
Well, do you know I haven't, and I've had invitations, and just I've been overseas, and then damn it, now we're all locked down. I can't drive at the moment, so I'm hoping by the end of this year to be up and visit, and actually I have a cousin who's reasonably close. Say I've got no excuse not to be there, and I'm desperate to go. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm absolutely desperate to go. Somehow or other, just haven't done it. No. It's insane. I think because I've seen the photographs, and Alex very kindly sent me the first clerk as well, from so I feel I've been involved a wee bit, and just sort of kept a little bit in the loop. And why have I not been there? So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it.
You'll be very welcome when you do come over. You'll be a VIP.
No, thank you.
I mean, you are part of the DNA. It was your creation, and Alex and the team are just keeping it up, I suppose, and keeping your.
Oh no, brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. No, it's superb. It's great. I mean, it's great that, as you say, that the design has remained. Has remained constant and works. I mean, obviously it works. That's what's so cool. Yeah.
The comments we get, which is funny, you do the tasting, people say we can't read the labels; they're too small. The wording.
Yes. I mean, the reason for that is it had to be a small label to show off the color of the whiskey.
Well.
And that was the prime reason. And then the wee medallion is to just show which region it comes from. By the different colours.
Color scheme, so Highland.
Yes.
Because most independent bottlers now are using that color scheme, almost the same.
Oh, are they?
So is that you?
Yeah, that was me. That was me doing that. So we had the different colours. So dark blue for Campbelltown, light blue for Island, and then the sort of the red for Highland, green for Speyside, the sort of beigey yellow or golden for Lowland, and then the purple for Isla.
I had no idea it was you that started that, the colour scheme, because definitely you can see it in the new.
Yeah, no, that's funny that others have used it as well. But it makes sense, because then you can see it. So you see the bottle from afar.
Yeah.
There's instant color, so now you know which region you're going for. But the main thing was it was to get sort of to show off the actual color. Say, I think one of the best photographs of Adelphi is that whiskies are all in a row from very light all the way up to the very dark, with the dancing man behind. But there's a sort of, that shows off the wonderful natural color, and it shows off the fact that Adelphi is unchill filtered, uncolored. It's just as is. It's you just basically just poured whiskey out of the cask into the bottle, and that's it.
The Adelphi rainbow. We try and replicate that when we take our pictures of the groups of bottles that we put.
Yes, yeah. I know. I like that Adelphi rainbow. That's lovely. That's good.
It's beautiful.
But I mean, it works well. Certainly in the sort of some of these wonderfully smart sort of bars. Where they've got lighting from behind. I mean, they actually really enjoy having, be able to show off the actual natural color.
So much glass. And obviously you went with clear bottles, where I know the single malt, Scottish Malt Whisky Society, they always had a colored glass. And
yeah, well, I just wanted to show off what we had. I wanted, the main thing to me was to share my wonder at how different everything was. From just normal, blended whiskey, which had a sort of, whiskey is this color, whiskey is this volume, whiskey should taste like this. Adelphi and the Scotch Malt Whisky Society are just tossing all that away and saying, no, whiskey is this, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's what, I suppose one of the things that I did, which was quite naughty, and it didn't financially work, but it did prove a point. But no one likes a smart ass, was I did a tasting for my wine merchant friend. He bought some whiskies, and he was doing a brandy tasting. And I said, I bet you I can confuse your brandy buyers by putting in some of my whiskies. And I was right. No one admitted it, and no one bought any of my whiskey. Because it just refused to admit that the whiskey actually tasted in their minds just like a brandy.
I bet you switched something on in their minds, though. They must have gone, "Oh, he's actually on something."
Yeah, absolutely. But it wasn't quite a blind tasting. I said whiskey was in.
Yeah.
But they had the expectation of what a whiskey tastes like and a brandy. So it just goes back to Sheila Birtles, and when you look at a lot of your decision as to how something is going to taste has already been made before you put it to your mouth.
Yeah.
Which is the importance of blind tasting, and those wonderful, what color is it? Blue, those blue glasses. I don't know if you use those. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're vital for really to choose to cask.
Yeah.
Absolutely vital. Yeah.
I've loved this hearing you talk about how it started, and that you started with that course with Sheila and getting to know the sensory. That's how, to me now, that makes so much sense. Whereas I say in the 90s, it would have been quite unusual. It was just about making money and have a business, really, for some industries. And you just took it so serious and wanted to get to know.
Well, it was, I mean, I suppose I was very lucky. It was my hobby as well. So if you can make a business out of your hobby, that's most of the work done, really, isn't it? Well, there isn't any work. It's just hilarious.
That's probably that's something you just said that's come through in every Adelphi session I have had so far. Is everybody we work with, they've always come back to that. We enjoy it. It's not a chore. We really enjoy this. Working in the whiskey industry, it's fun, and they enjoy whiskey. I spoke to a lady in Canada, and she said it's our joy, and the same with the person in New Zealand, that Michael Fraser Milne, he was saying the same thing. He enjoyed it so much. It was so much fun, and it was.
Yeah, I mean, the whiskey trade is fantastic. I mean, the people working in it, and I got a lot of help from my competitors. I mean, there's no, I would absolutely I would definitely put my hand and say, I couldn't have done it without help from my competitors at all. And that's the joy of that trade, is that everyone helps each other.
I have so many more questions for you, but I'm going to let you go now because I've taken up so much of your time. I really enjoyed hearing about your you starting up Adelphi and your history, your family history in the whiskey industry. I've learned so much. And
yeah, no, pleasure. It's a great topic, and yeah, Charlie's written lots of books about it, and I'm sure there will be more to come as well. You can never really get to the bottom of it. No, and that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun.
100%.
And there's going to be folklore around Ardnamurchan in no time at all.
And thank you so much again, Jamie. And
all righty.
I will thank you.
Well, hopefully, we'll see you again.